Hello chess friends and welcome to Azarov's chess channel and welcome to my Basics in Chess series. So in this series we're following opening principles, middle game strategies and the endgame strategies. Today we'll talk about some middle game strategies again. Today we'll talk about this isolated pawn situation that can happen to you and happen probably in some chess games, and you should really know what to do when you face maybe an opponent's isolated pawn, or when you yourself have an isolated pawn. What should we do? So in our first video of this isolated pawn situations, we'll analyze the weak isolated pawn. It means that you should follow the basic rules when your opponent has maybe an isolated pawn, and the basic rules are that first of all you should block the isolated pawn. You should never allow your opponent to advance the pawn. Maybe your opponent has the opportunity to advance it maybe for one rank, but then it's really time to stop it and really create a blockade against this pawn. So the other thing is that we can go into favorable trades of pieces. So it means when this isolated pawn is maybe on a light square, then it's good maybe to trade off the dark square bishops, and your opponent continues maybe the game with the light square bishop. But then this light square bishop is sometimes only used in order to defend this isolated pawn, and then you can play maybe much more active with your other pieces and go and attack this pawn further. But while opponent is defending this pawn, you can maybe change the direction of the attack, maybe find some new weaknesses, maybe create a weak square position, maybe a new isolated pawn or similar ideas. So one of the good things when your opponent has an isolated pawn is to go into a favorable endgame. So it means simply that when maybe all of the pieces are off the board, then you can simply attack the weak pawn with your king. Maybe if you still have maybe one knight on the board, then the isolated pawn is of course a clear target. So in order to explain you this more, I've prepared again some examples. Here's a game played by Emanuel Lasker against Siegbert Tarrasch. Tarrasch, of course, the creator of the Tarrasch defense, and the Tarrasch defense is, I think, a good opening, but sometimes in that defense you risk to get out with the isolated pawn. So Emanuel Lasker, of course, great theoretician, but also a great middle game strategy player, found here a good way how to play against this isolated pawn. So here you see Siegbert Tarrasch has here really a weakness. The problem for white is that black can push the pawn on d4. It's basically unstoppable. We cannot do that. If you play something like e3, I think that d4 is a possibility. So here Emanuel Lasker found a good way how to block this isolated pawn by using this idea to go into favorable trades of pieces. Because first of all, this isolated pawn is a weakness. It's protected by this knight and the queen, so we should attack it somehow. Of course, we cannot attack it directly, but we can attack it indirectly, and we can now attack at least the key defender of this pawn, and it's the knight on f6. Here Manuel Lasker played bishop to g5, forcing now Siegbert Tarrasch to go really with this move d4, because if we capture this pawn, then we can simply play queen takes d5, and it would be a bad position for black. So that's why Tarrasch advanced the pawn, which is the main idea when you have the isolated pawn, but we'll talk about that in another video. Here knight to e4 was played by Emanuel Lasker, and we have now bishop to e7, and that's what I meant. This pawn is on a dark square, so this bishop could have troubles to maybe activate itself, because if we trade off maybe this bishop for the knight, then the bishop comes on f6, and this pawn is standing a little bit in the way, then this bishop couldn't play. So our main idea is to play maybe something like knight to e1 and then knight to d3, and black is continuing the game with a bad bishop sort of. So even if this bishop somehow gets to c5, again the same idea, knight to e1, knight to d3, and again this bishop is blocked out. So that's why after bishop to e7 we have bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, and now rook to c1. So far black cannot advance the pawn on d3. Black would love to do that, because black really needs the open game. You see this bishop is blocked out. We don't want, of course, to take. That's not a problem. We shouldn't take this bishop now. This bishop is bad. So in the game after rook to c1, we have rook to e8, and now knight to e1, as I said, with the idea to play maybe something like knight to c5 and then knight to d3. liberating our light square diagonal because black has advanced the pawn on d4 and has opened this very powerful diagonal for our light square bishop. So in the game bishop to f5, we have this idea knight to c5. Again, d3 is not possible. We can simply take knight takes d3, even if black captures, bishop takes d3, then knight takes d3 again, and we're defending our b2 pawn. So it's really a necessary system here that that white has built here. So in the game bishop to c8, Tarrasch saw his problems around the square b7, but here knight takes b7 anyway, and after bishop takes b7 we have rook takes c6. And if black, for instance, takes here bishop takes c6, let's see now the possible continuation. Bishop takes c6, okay, let's see, maybe move queen to c7, bishop takes e8, maybe rook takes e8, and again we would create a very powerful blockade with the move knight to d3. The bishop is blocked out. We could play even something like b3 to get out of the range of the bishop, then all of our pawns would be on light squares, and now it's really a good continuation here for white. So after the move rook takes c6, queen to a5 was played, a3, rook to b8, and now after rook to c2, here we have bishop to a6, attacking the pawn on e2, but now knight to d3, the blockade after bishop takes d3, queen takes d3. I'll stop here. It's not about showing you now some endgame techniques, how Emanuel Lasker won this game, but okay, he's a pawn up. Still, black is continuing the game with an isolated pawn. We have created a new blockade with the move queen to d3, and we can play maybe much more freely with our bishop, maybe bishop to e4, still attacking the h7, rook to c1 is also a possibility, occupying the c5. But that was all possible, I think, in the beginning because of this very, very nice idea to give up here the bishop takes f6, and now really securing the blockade with knight to c5 and knight to e1, really nice blocking system against this potential d3 move. So let's see now another example. Here is a gameplay by Predrag Ostojic against Rafael Vaganin. Again, black has the isolated pawn, so we want again to block it somehow. In the game here white tried bishop to g5, attacking again a weakness, this weak d5 pawn. It's indirectly attacking because the knight is of course the protector of the d5 pawn. We have castling, rook to e1, queen to c7. We have now h3, preventing some bishop to g4 ideas, because black would love maybe here even to give up somehow this light square bishop, at least develop it somehow, get some kind of an activity, because this bishop, as I said, could be a problem because this pawn is on a light square. So this bishop is only used maybe in a later stage of the game just as a defensive piece, in order to defend maybe this isolated pawn on d5. So h6, we have bishop to d2, and now after bishop to d7, bishop to c3, again a new move which prevents a potential d4. So d4 is of course so far not possible, but if you could just imagine this game after 15, 20, even 30 moves, then maybe we have some trades of pieces, then maybe black manages to advance the pawn here on d4, and then we could have some problems of space, because if black manages to do that, if black gets this pawn on the 4th rank, then we could have some space problems, then we would be kicked away by this isolated pawn. So that's why it's really necessary to create really a nice blocking system. All of these pieces you see, knight on b3, knight on f3 and bishop on c3 and the queen on d1 are aiming simply against this potential d4 move. So rook to e8, we have a3, we have a6, bishop to f1, and now after b5 we have now knight to d4, simply forcing more trades of pieces. Let's now just imagine one position. After something like knight takes d4, we have knight takes d4. Okay, we could play something like knight to c6. Let's see now a possible continuation. It wasn't played in the game. So after knight to c6, again we could play something like knight takes c6, and after bishop to c6 we could play simply, I think, bishop to d4, here blocking again the pawn, and play something like c3. You see how problematic this bishop can be when it's blocked out by its isolated pawn. So that's why here again a blocking system is really necessary with the move bishop to d4. So in the game, knight to a5 was played, and again we have now favorable trades of pieces, because this bishop on d6 has a good activity, because this isolated pawn is on a light square, and of course the dark square bishop has some maneuver possibilities. And now bishop to b4, really a nice positional move, forcing basically this trades of pieces. So knight to c6, we have bishop takes d6 and queen to d6. I'm not going to explain now again the whole game. White even lost the game, but with a huge blunder. It's not my point. I think that White has accomplished the blockade against this isolated pawn, at least now for a while, still with possibilities to compete on the e-file, and still with a nice activity with this bishop, although this bishop is on f1, but still it has good attacking possibilities. So let's see now our last example. We have now a gameplay by Walter Browne against Ljubomir Ljubojevic. Here you can pause the video and try to find maybe the best continuation, but our subject is of course the isolated pawn. Try to really find a good way how to proceed here to really crack the position. I think you can find this move if you apply this ideas of positional trades of pieces and creating isolated pawn situations. Here Walter Browne played a very nice move, bishop takes f6. So after g takes f6, now d5. Even if you sacrifice the pawn, like in this position, of course if black doesn't react, then it's really tricky. Then you have really some weak attacking possibilities here around the square e6. So black is really forced to take now e takes d5, but now we have a new position in which black has an isolated pawn, but also a weak pawn structure here around the king. So it's really a bad position in the game. White tried queen to b4. Now it's really easy to include all of the pieces in the attack. It's really easy to find the best squares for the pieces, because if we apply again the ideas how to play against the isolated pawn, again we would first of course play something like knight to d4 and try maybe to cement our knight on a very nice square here on f5 combined with the queen. This could be also a very dangerous checkmate threat against black's king. So in the game, queen to d7 was played. We have now queen to h4. We have king to g7, protecting the pawn, and now comes this idea knight to d4, and here in this position black resigned, because we can now even play on some rook lift ideas. We can play something like bishop to c2, so great attacking possibilities, but that was all possible because we created this isolated pawn, split pawns here in front of the king, creating weaknesses. You see this, all of these pawns are simple targets, and that's why White won the game very easily. So let's go now and remind ourselves again how to play against this isolated pawn. So block the pawn, create a blockade, go into favorable trades of pieces, especially when it comes to maybe bishop trades. So you should see where this pawn is. If it's on a light square, then maybe it's good to trade off the dark squares off the board. Then you see, like in this position here, again black has some troubles because he has the light square bishop and the isolated pawn is on a light square. So, and as I said, also here you can also go into a favorable endgame. Even if this position maybe goes now into an endgame, I think it's playable for white. We can attack this weakness, we can attack maybe this weakness. So simple targets here even for white's king. So okay, I hope that you realize these ideas, and I hope that you enjoyed this video. Meanwhile, you can watch my other middle game strategies videos from my basics in chess series. Here's the link, and you can also watch my chess tactics and chess puzzles videos, in which I show you all of the possible tactical motifs that can happen during a chess game. And you can also subscribe to my channel if you like this content. Thanks you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.